Welcome to the Biotech Startups podcast by Exceeder. Join us as we speak with first-time founders, serial entrepreneurs, and experienced investors about the challenges and triumphs of running a biotech startup, from pre-seed to IPO, with your host, John Chi. In our last episode, we spoke with Bryan Dechairo about growing up in Southern California, getting his BA in Integrative Biology from the University of California, Berkeley, transitioning from working for Roche to working for a smaller startup like Sequana Therapeutics, and getting his PhD at UCL while working for Sequana. If you missed it, be sure to go back and give part 1 a listen. We continue our conversation in part 2, talking about Bryan's experience moving from a small startup to Pfizer, the crucial nature of big data in modern genetics, working for Medco Health, and the importance of accessible, affordable, and accurate diagnostics resources.
It was a startup company, and with any startup company, you do feel like a friend. But it was my first time running, instead of being a scientist in a team, it was my first time running a team of scientists. And so in that high throughput genetics lab, I had about 15 people working for me. And so instead of being part of a family, you start creating a family, right? In a sense. And everybody's different. You have to care about people as individuals and understand like not everybody's the same and they have different ways of contributing. And so that was one of the big lessons for me there. But also it really made me get to understand about big data. It's another big theme in my career, but I always loved big data. And so first of all, we're using population, like thousands and thousands of families that have sporadic diseases that they inherited or not inherited from family members. And we're tracking that through these big, large families. And so this heterogeneity allows us to start seeing these little signals through all the noise because you have big data. What I also realized was that everything a company produces is data. And so like what machine you used, what equipment, who did it? What reagents did you use? You can track all of those with barcodes. And so I got everything like barcoded and labeled, and we'd zap all of ourselves. And it just became this like big data engine where we could see where all the problems were and where the inefficiencies were, and just start getting like faster and better and faster and better. And again, if you remember the sequencing the human genome at the time, it was like, oh, it's going to take us years. And then and it takes us days. And it's and we were just getting faster. And at the end of my PhD, I then spent 4 more years at Oxagen running this group. At the end of the time I left, 7 years later, my team could do what I did for 3 years of my PhD in 1 day. Right? And it's like at some point you're like, that kind of,
oh my God,
like fantastic. But it also sucks because you feel like, well, I actually spent 3 years and now I can do that in a day. Like you felt really happy about it, and now it's like a commodity almost.
Yeah. No, I had that. I have that same experience too. Just looking back, like when we started Exceeder, like it was, I was mentioning like startups not being cool. So it felt like we had a lot of like headwinds, and finally the startup ecosystem started to become a thing where like big pharma or just the big players were kind of relying on like startups to do R&D, and we're like, oh, finally we can start having these conversations. And then the advent of like the internet and like really starting to make these connections was just like, it's like, wow, I was like doing door-to-door sales, like as like, I'm like dating myself, but I was just like remembering on that. I was like, I really did that. Like, it was like, this was, just hello. I was like, this is, and like, no one really does that anymore. I just remember, but very cool. And so something really interesting you mentioned is like, this is your first time managing and building the family, like, creating a family. And 15 is like a pretty, like for your first go,
is like startup company. That's a pretty big chunk of a company.
Yeah, it's a pretty big chunk. How was that experience? It's like, I feel like people are like, the natural progression is to start managing, but sometimes I think, the skill sets as a individual contributor are very different than managing. How did it come naturally to you, or was it something that was it a learned skill? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think, like being able to like be efficient, put pieces in places to build up efficiencies and they get there is something that's natural to me. And I understanding where the bottlenecks are, how to like solve those bottlenecks. see where the future bottlenecks are coming before they come. These are all things that I love doing because it's like forward thinking strategy. So that came natural. Dealing with the people, at first was a struggle, like the different personalities, but then I started like caring about that. I mean, I care about it, but like I put energy into like, everybody's different. Like, how do we harness the power of different people and put them in the right spots and things like that? And so that took a little bit longer to get better at, but I did over the 7 years there get better at the individuals and the people, understanding that. And so that was very, very helpful for the rest of my working time as well. And then the other thing that I really learned was there are teams. Sometimes there's the teams that are like they're the creative. They're out there getting the new ideas. And then there's the teams like a high throughput genetic facility that I'm running, where they just feel like they're creating all the data that's going to actually make the company a success, but everybody treats them like a commodity, right? And so what I learned about that was you can get anybody excited about their job if you actually constantly talk to them about like, what's the impact of the job? Like without you, you wouldn't have this. This discovery was because of the work you do, all right? And kind of linking back the outcomes, the company outcomes, the macro outcomes back to the day-to-day that they're doing is so critical, I think, no matter what a person does in a company, right? So that they can feel part of the bigger picture.
Absolutely. And I think that's, as teams get larger and there's more entropy and there's more and more stakeholders, I think sometimes, to manage the entropy and the large organization, sometimes people just opt to like spreadsheet management and people are not numbers in a spreadsheet. And I love that you're, making that connection to directly the impact to the work is incredibly important versus just like, doing, managing from a spreadsheet, which ultimately kind of exactly what you said, it makes someone feel like a commodity, and no one should feel that way.
No.
And it's interesting because that's something that I had the same experience as the team got larger, and I'm learning to kind of manage a team of very diverse, working styles, personalities. And it's a thing where, if someone is more introverted and needs a little bit more time and doesn't feel comfortable communicating in a certain environment, making space for that person to like take the time you need, when you're ready, let us know. And then for someone who's maybe on the other side that's more extroverted and it's go, 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 and figuring out how do you channel that energy without, having them kind of butt heads. It's both art and science. And something too that I think for anyone who's like thinking about trying their hand at management is exactly that. Think about that and know your personnel, which is incredibly important versus, just being too process oriented. We're just like, this is it. Just do it this way.
It's definitely not cookie cutter or one size fits all. And I think that one of the things that people should all do is think about constant reorg. People, like, you come in, you make a decision, and then people stick with their decision. And what you need to do is you need to constantly be looking back at, like, step out of your body, look back at what you're doing, and then go, should I make any adjustments? Because like sometimes you find people who are the innovators, and you find people who need to do the slow, methodical, but more quality, and they want to make sure, and like you can move people around and make space, especially as you're a growing organization, to do that and put people in the right spot, and stop looking in the mirror. Like we all have a tendency to reward the people who are most like ourselves, and because we think, wow, we're doing fine. You're probably not.
Exactly.
Look at ourselves.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And just to piggyback on kind of what you said too, is like, not only is it okay to like kind of like look back and see where people fit best and put them in the position to succeed, but it's something I've noticed at least too, is that sometimes people like change like over the course. Like if you're working with a team for, years, you can see skill sets change. You can see, people are learning new skill sets, interests are changing. And there's nothing better than putting someone in a position where they're having a lot of fun and they're really good at it. That's like a match made in heaven, versus like, not having both of those. Sometimes it can feel like a slog, and being open to the concept that like, hey, like what you're doing now, we might evolve it into something different over time.
Have those conversations.
Yeah, exactly. And almost like, as a manager, it's like being proactive about it. It's like, where, where do you see yourself going, and where do you want to be? And so after your time at UCL and Oxagen, you've wrapped up your graduate studies. Did you know, and you mentioned you didn't want, academia was not not it for you. How did you know what you're going to get into next?
So again, I always think that when you look at career, you have to look at your career. You got to look at it you got to look at your resume and say, where do you need to be? And so there was a couple things that I learned at Oxagen. One was I had just been at 2 startup companies, right?
Yep.
And they were both having a hard time getting extra funding. And the reason I had left Oxagen was because we were downsizing now because we were successful using genetics. We were now moving towards therapeutics. And so you can't invest in continue, like you don't have ultimate money. So like we had to move away from my team to, therapeutics people. I'm not a therapeutics person. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we were downsizing my team, and I realized I need to go. Like this is the money needs to flow towards the assets that are going to have value. We discovered disease genes. Now we got to go get the drugs for those disease genes and move forward. So I understood that, and I also realized that like diagnostics are really powerful, but the therapeutic companies put all the money into the therapeutics and not into the diagnostics. But like you have to start with the right diagnosis before you get a therapeutic. And so we were always relying on this pharma money to like survive as these small biotech companies. And I was like, you know what? I need some big pharma experience. I need to understand what's going on in the big pharma world. And I also know that diagnostics can really help medications be better. And this like idea of personalized medicine was just starting to come about, where you could use DNA or genetics to help target medications to the right people, the right population of people. And I've been doing population genetics now for a decade. So I was like, I need to go to big pharma and I need to go into personalized medicine. And so I spent a whole year in the UK. There was only 3 pharmaceutical companies. There was AstraZeneca, Pfizer, and GSK at the time. That was the only 3 in the UK. I thought I want to stay in the UK. So I applied to all 3 of those. And I finally got an offer to apply for a job at Pfizer, but the job was going to be back in the US, in Connecticut. And so I said, okay, well, I've been waiting for this. Let me apply. I got the job. And interestingly enough, the hiring manager, which I didn't know, was somebody I worked with back at Sequana Therapeutics, back at Torrey Pines. Yeah. And we didn't know. I was like, wow, this is amazing. And just like how you just like never burn bridges, like never, like this is the way, like you never, everybody's a small community. And so this guy, Hakan Sakul, who I worked with at Sequana, hired me back into Pfizer to really do pharmacogenomics and personalized medicine of therapeutics. And so I moved to Connecticut at Pfizer for the next 5 years.
Holy moly! What a small world. That's like, and so now going in, you're like, I need this big pharma experience. Now, and I asked you the question about the culture shock of moving from the US to the UK. Was there when you move from a startup to big pharma, and this is like very big pharma?
Yeah.
Did you experience a culture shock? Shock?
This is where you said, Bryan, when you showed up in the UK, did you have panic attacks? No, when I showed up back in the US at a pharmaceutical company, in development, bridging research, development, and commercial, and being one of like the therapeutic area leads when there's only like 6 or 7 of us for this entire therapeutic area. I was like, wow, am I way in over my head? I thought I had that charlatan, like that, that posture and clothes, like mentality. And I really started like, having some like panic attacks. I believe in myself, but like when you're like this, like big fish in a small pond, you feel good. And all of a sudden you're just like, have this big responsibility, and there's all these great people and big committees and everything around you. Like that was a pressure. That was a pressure I was not used to.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I haven't been there, but I could I imagine I would feel the same way. And so how did you adjust to that? How did you start to find your place in Pfizer? And can you talk a little bit about the teammates that you were working with and the connections that you made?
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about a few different things. So first, I do really care about mental illness. And later on, I went to a mental illness company and I was seriously going through panic attacks at the time. And so I learned one thing that I think the world should know about, which is, I was in charge of like neuroscience, molecular medicine and neuroscience and personalized medicine and neuroscience there. So I'm surrounded by like the world leading psychiatrists and neurologists and things. And it was a big facility. So we had our own like doctors and nursing stations or whatever. They would give Pfizer meds for free, like, because part of your benefits package, right? And so I went down there and I went to the nurse, and they can't prescribe because they can't prescribe their own employees. But they said, Bryan, you're having panic attack. You're having like anxiety. Like, don't worry. Like, everybody has this. Like, it's common. Like, 50% of people at Pfizer are having this issue. Like, whatever. Like, it's a common thing. Like, go here's some connections. And so I got onto some anxiety medications, and like, almost overnight, like I felt a ton better. I'm not saying drugs are the solution for all issues, but like I literally felt better. I felt better knowing that I wasn't alone. Right. And so that was really impactful. And that when I was a chief medical officer at Assurex, that really mattered to me when I was doing mental health and taking care of patients and talking to them on a daily basis, because I'd been through it. But the other thing that I also saw with big companies were, there's no such thing as jobs for life, and people think they go to a big company, they're going to go to security, but it wasn't the case. Like at that point in time, Pfizer was acquiring big companies like Wyeth and they acquired Lipitor, and they were just acquiring company after company. Every single year we had this thing called adapting to scale or something like that, right? And McKinsey would come in. And so like one year we were like a technology zone. Next year we were like site-based model. And then we went through a therapeutic-based model. And all that really meant was like every year they're going to lay people off.
Oh my God.
And every year I had to reapply for my job. And that's stressful.
Very stressful.
One of the things that came about it was all of these different technologies started coming together. So we had like genetics, proteomics, metabolomics. We had wearables, like before the Apple Watch, we had like these big wearables for sleep studies, blister pack technology with electronics, all the like clinical technologies, all of these different groups. And they all had like these neuroscience leads. And as we were starting to pile all these technologies into one big group called molecular medicine, there was multiple neuroscience. I had to apply for my job. And luckily I kept getting the position. And I just got more and more and more tools in my toolbox to apply to the drug development pipeline. And it kind of taught me again strategy about like, just because you have a whole bunch of cool technology doesn't mean it should be used everywhere.
Yeah.
The job is to say, this cool little hammer, not everything's a nail. Like over here we need nails, over here we need screws, over here we need staplers. Like it's okay. Like we just need to pick and choose the right technology at the right place at the right time. And that was what I loved about the job at Pfizer, was that strategic decision making.
Very cool. The constant rearranging of the organization, a little bit less cool, but less cool. But I love the ability to just like kind of like find again, it's like finding the right tool for the right situation versus just like, again, it's kind of what I forgot how the saying exactly goes, but like, if you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
That's right.
Versus in this situation, Pfizer, having all these cool tools, you have this opportunity to kind of a bird's eye view and kind of have a more macro strategic outlook on it. And what was the question? You manage a large team at Pfizer, and you've managed a large team at Oxagen. Are there any differences between managing a large team in a big pharma company versus a startup?
So what was interesting about Pfizer was I was in charge of no one directly. So what was interesting was it was a matrix-based organization. So all of the technology experts lived in core functions. So like genetics, proteomics, metabolomics, clinical technologies, like that's all the imaging, like PET scans, MRI scans, wearable devices. These were all different like core technology groups. And then my job was to have a team put together from all of those groups for the various drug development programs, whether it was in research, commercial, even commercial stage or development stage, and say, this drug program needs this tool. I need people who are experts on that to be part of that clinical team. and I would sell to the organization about why that technology was needed in that specific spot. And so I then was in charge of all those teams that were supporting the neuroscience portfolio, but none of them reported to me. They were just reporting to me for what their work was. Like they had to go out and get work. I had to bring them work, and then they were on my teams, but I wasn't their line manager.
Whoa, that's really interesting. And I'll be honest, that's the first time I've ever heard about like the Matrix organization. I know at Berkeley now, they are like, there's the Lee Ka-shing building that they recently built, and they're trying to have a similar situation where it's like chem department, MCB, just kind of like this like satellite of each department, and they pull people together. It's not a direct report type of situation. But how was that? Like, how was that experience going from something where it sounds like you had 15 direct reports? Now you have, it's almost like you're like, you're pulling from an all-star roster to work on hard problems. How was that?
It was great because you get to know a lot of different people. You get to know where they're good, where they're not. You get to pull, and it is like picking a team. Like you go there and like, you know what, I would really like this person over here to be on this team. Like they get it. They understand this problem. They're like a champion for it. But the other nice thing too was it was also like a sell-in process both ways, because the core people representing them, they would tell me like why they want to solve the problem. Here's why I think I can solve the problem. Here's why I think I can solve the problem, right? And then I would be like, I think maybe the two of you can solve it together, or no, I'm going to pick you and not that one. So like you're picking the teams and then you're executing on it. It was great. It's like having all the pieces that at your table to combine in any way to like do things in a unique structure. For example, we were doing, like now you're talking about early detection of cancer all the time. We were doing early detection of Alzheimer's disease. And it was a combination of, could you have a genetic risk factor for it? And then could I follow you on a electronic cognitive battery where you do cognitive testing on a frequency basis that I just like send you over the internet? And then if you're having a certain decline in your cognition, can I go get you to a spinal tap where I look at some proteins in your CSF? And then if you're positive there, can I move you into a very expensive PET scan imaging to like look at a certain early hallmark of Alzheimer's disease and get you into these early detection studies? And so it was like the ability to like take a piece of each different idea and combine it in a unique way to empower like novel treatments and things. So it was super fun.
That's badass. That's like super badass. And I'm curious. You mentioned that you have to assemble the right team, but you also have to find the problem to solve. And I'm going to assume you'd also have to like pitch it.
So this is something that I learned at Pfizer that I do here at Sherlock all the time, which is start with the problem statement. Instead of see like I have a solution, I'm looking for a problem. Like other way around.
Yeah.
And Pfizer was phenomenal. And so they would go to the customer and say, what's the problem we're solving? We need a drug that's going to do this, 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 and this. Has to fit into this profile. It has to be once a day. It has to be and they'd create this minimally acceptable commercial profile. And then they would go back to the teams and say, if you build something that can address this commercial need, we will move it forward. But if it doesn't address that, we're not going to take it forward. And so it was always start with the end in mind. It has to fit into that parameter. If it doesn't, don't do it. That was another big lesson there. And that was fun because now it's all, okay, I have all these toys and all of these technologies and all of these possible drugs, and now I have this profile. How do I pull pieces together to kind of fit into that space, and then we'll win, right?
Very cool, very cool. And yeah, and it's such a simple. I mean, I don't want to say simple, but it's a straightforward concept to just like maybe let's versus like find the problem first versus having a solution and then just like looking for the
startup companies don't do that, right? This is why I love at Sherlock. Like when I joined Sherlock and I brought in my chief commercial officer, Julie and team, the whole point was let's bring in commercial now. We're a research stage company. Let's bring in commercial to go figure out like what is the killer app that is needed, and then see if we can build it with our technology, right?
Yeah. And
that's what we've done here. So
yeah, and it's interesting that you bring that up because I feel like there are plenty of startups that don't do that for a really long time, And then there's a rude awakening, like a very rude awakening at a later stage where everyone has already invested time, money, blood, sweat, and tears, that there wasn't a problem to begin with. And it's just, what were we doing? And that's what I kind of love about this, the straightforwardness of it is just like invert it, just like quickly invert it before you plow like 10 years of your life into something.
Well, and also know whether there's something like, are you really differentiated, or if there's something different? Like, I mean, if it's good, like all those different tools at Pfizer, it was like, well, we could do imaging, it works. We could do proteins in the CSF, it works. We can do some genetics, they work. Like it's like, they all work, but like, which one's going to be the best solution? Like, but if you were an independent person, you'd all be arguing that yours is the winner.
Yeah,
right?
You're the best.
You're the best.
Yeah, the protein team is the best.
When I came into Sherlock, we were trying to use CRISPR diagnostics, but in the central lab. And I kept saying, why are we using CRISPR in the central lab? PCR, which I've done for 30 years, is in the labs. It's great. It's the gold standard. And this is not going to be any better. So like, this is a great tool, but not where we're trying to position it. It will not work. It's great for decentralizing and democratizing healthcare. It is not good for keeping healthcare in central labs because PCR is already great there. We don't need to do it. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So, it's kind of like evaluating like what is the kind of like the improvements, like what multiple of improvement are we going to have here and achieve here? It's novel. It's for sure novel, but like it reminds me, I was like reading on and this is clinical trials and stuff are a big ball of wax, so I can't pretend to be an expert at it, but it's just like the FDA taking the approach of like you're going to have to prove that whatever you're putting through the clinic is going to be significantly better than what is already out there. So, and please don't waste your time on being just like an incremental, incrementally better. Let's try to actually raise the bar in terms of patient outcomes versus just like pure incrementalism.
Yeah, and like Pfizer was great. Again, a great learning ground for me because they had even if you were going to compete in the same class of therapeutics, they had a concept which is either you're first in class or you're best in class. Meaning you're the first to market and you build the brand, and because you're first, everybody uses you first, and so therefore you're gonna be the winner, or you're the best. Meaning like you can come out and take over from the best. Because you have some advantage, you can do it. And like we had Prozac and then we launched Zoloft, right? I mean, but then Lexapro came over, but that was the concept: first to market or first in class or best in class.
Yeah.
And what I've learned in diagnostics along the way is that oftentimes being best is not. Sometimes you can't dislodge the thing that's first to market, and so first to market, even if you get better, everybody's so used to using what is there, and it's integrated, and it's like in plans and in hospitals, and it's so integrated that you have to be way, way, way better for anybody to change. Like incremental better, as you just said, is not enough. It has to be significantly better to dislodge something that's fully integrated already. And the longer somebody has a head start, the better you're going to have to be to dislodge it. That sounds like routine.
What an insight, because it's like, it's kind of like this, like it's inertia. It really is just inertia. Like, people like convenience, and they are always like, so you're going to have to really, really convince me, like, this works. This is great. Like, you're going to have to really convince me to get off this. So that's a great observation. So, you've been at Pfizer now. When did you know it was time to move on from Pfizer?
So it was a really interesting day. So, I've told you a little bit about these diagnostics. I care about them, but like diagnostics can do so much. Like you have risk, then you have like early detection, then you have diagnosis, then you can make a prognostic, like how bad your outcome going to be. Then you can do it for like treatment selection, monitoring whether those treatments are working. It's like there's so many things that diagnostics can do, and you don't even need like therapeutics. Like sometimes if you're early enough, you can just like have a surgery, like in cancer, and cut it out, and then you're not malignant yet or whatever. And so I realized that diagnostics have all of this great value, even more value, as I've always said, than therapeutics. And therapeutics get paid like billions of dollars, and diagnostics are paid pennies in the lab, right? And I was like, something's wrong. And so all of a sudden one day, I Medco came to Pfizer, and I didn't know anything about pharmacy benefit managers. Well, pharmacy benefit managers were the biggest payers in the United States. They're the biggest purchaser of drugs in the U.S. They insure all the costs of drugs in the United States, and they also deliver them to the pharmacies, right? And so, like, this company I never heard of, Medco, comes in. They're a Fortune 35 company. They make $65 billion in revenue a year. They're the biggest purchaser of drugs in the entire United States. And they started talking about like personalized medicine and how it's the diagnostic that should drive the medication utilization. If you don't have the right diagnosis, you shouldn't get medications off label or all these places. Like, you should get the right medication for the right diagnosis. And I realized, wow, a pharmacy benefit manager could become a diagnostic benefit manager. And the chief medical officer, Rob Epstein at Medco, wanted Medco to not just be a pharmacy benefit manager, but a diagnostics. And diagnostics were paid out of the medical insurance because the doctors order them and not out of the pharmacy insurance. But if we could pull them into the pharmacy insurance, you'd pair up the right diagnostic with the right medication, right? And so they were just serendipitously, I realized I met them, and like 2 weeks later, a headhunter came to me and said, we're looking for the head of diagnostic R&D for Medco. Would you like to apply? And I was like, absolutely, I'd love to apply. And so I got the job and moved down to Bethesda, Maryland, and was starting to create this like whole diagnostic arm of a pharmacy benefit manager.
Whoa, that's great. Honestly, that's crazy. Like, what a like, the timing is crazy, and it's also serendipitously that there's that overlap. And for a pharmacy benefit manager, sounds abundantly different than Pfizer, like structurally, everything, the product. Can you talk a little bit about making the shift to almost like not a different industry, but a different part of the industry, like the broader scientific industry?
It really opened my mind, right? Like, to actually understand like operations, right? Like what I like, just 2 minutes to understand like pharmacy benefit managers, how they came about was like drugs was a very small amount of spend compared to all of healthcare. And so the United Healthcares, all the big insurance companies were not focused on this. And so the PBM said, you know what, I can actually save the individual employers money on the pharmacy side if I manage that with the pharmacists, what's the right medications? Are you doing it? And so these pharmacy benefit managers came out, and they initially were just managing who pays for what and how it's going to like CVS or Walgreens or your pharmacies like Rite Aid. And then all of a sudden they realized, well, we're paying for the drugs and we're moving them. Why don't we just order mail order pharmacy? And so they started like delivering your drugs in the mail. And so then they had their own, they paid for the drugs. They actually bought the drugs. They actually put them in the bottles. They actually shipped them to your house for repeat. And they would still cover the drugs at the drugstore too. But now they're starting to shift the delivery to make it easier for people to stay consistent on the medications, to make it, right to your house instead of having to leave your house or leave work to pick up medications. And so I realized like this efficiency of delivery systems, doing things in a different way. It was amazing. And I thought, why we can do diagnostics that way. We could get a sample, like a saliva sample at home, and we could ship it to the lab, and the lab could get the results, and we could give the results to the patient on the portal. And that's what we started doing at Medco. We started working with these diagnostic companies in order to have like mail delivery of DNA collections and pairing them up with the right medication choices and covering the diagnostic tests and working with the diagnostic companies. It was great.
That sounds like a lot of infrastructure to be like a lot of infrastructure build out.
Well, the good news there was the PBMs already created all the infrastructure. So they already had the mail systems. They already had the delivery systems. They already had the payers. They already had the insurers, right? So it was just about putting the diagnostics into the infrastructure that had already been built out for pharmacy delivery, right?
Interesting. And so you're spearheading this new effort. How did the diagnostics companies feel about it?
They loved it. So the reason they loved it was we were all about value-based reimbursement. So right now, diagnostics don't get reimbursed, and they're always fighting for the medical policy coverage or whatever. And so what we had at Medco was this concept of can your closing gaps in care? Can your diagnostic help us get the right patients on the right medications so that they have better outcomes. And if we have better outcomes, we'll actually save money for the payers as well. And if they could use generic medications, which are cheaper than branded drugs, they could also save a lot of money as well. So we had this concept like genetics for generics, right? And it was great. I was like, and that's where I learned about this triple win, where it's like, can the payer win and save money? Can the clinical system, like whether it's the pharmacy or whether it's the doctor or whatever, like the healthcare system, can they have a win, better outcomes, easier delivery, and then does the patient have a better outcome as well? Like if all three are winning, then you're going to have a good equation. And so those diagnostic companies were like, finally, if I do something with Medco, they'll reimburse me directly. They'll pay me for it. I don't have to worry about coverage or who's going to pay me. And it's all about like the value proposition. How much money can I save by getting people on the right treatments for the healthcare system?
Yeah, that's amazing. And then, I was talking about kind of like when you're at Pfizer, having the right, right problem, right team. And it's kind of like these things when you have this sort of like alignment of like, it's like stakeholder alignment.
Yeah.
And when everyone is aligned, it's like, again, it's like magic happens again. And I'm sure the diagnostic companies too are also like, about time. Like
there was articles about it. It was about time. And it's because diagnostics never have a pathway to get reimbursed. And, in the United States, when a drug gets approved, it automatically gets utilized and it automatically goes to the medical companies and the insurance companies, and they figure out how we're going to pay for it. Like it becomes automatic. When a diagnostic gets implemented, there's nothing like that. So there's no guarantee for payment. Like you have to like knock on every door and say like, please, will you pay me something for this great tool that I want, right?
It's a weird bifurcation. I've never truly understood it. I can't pretend to like know the deep intricacies of it, but I've always found it weird. It's like very weird because like, again, exactly what you said. To know what therapeutic to use, you have to have a proper diagnosis. You like prescribing the wrong medicine is better to do nothing. Like, because like that, there's like side effects, like there's toxicology effects of like you can get serious harm for having the wrong medicine.
No, seriously, and that's what I did one of the companies that we were working with at Medco was a company called Assurex Health that was using pharmacogenomics to help pick medications that would help identify medications that would cause patients problems, so that they could avoid the wrong medication, and therefore at least you have a smaller list of medications to choose from that you might find one that works for you, but avoid the problems that the medications could cause, right? And so it wasn't trying to find out what would work; it was trying to find out what wouldn't work. You know? It's like
eliminate it. Yeah,
trying to find the needle in the haystack. We're not going to find the needle, but we're going to remove a ton of hay. And if you remove part of the hay, you're going to find the needle a lot easier if there's a needle in there for you, right? And that was one of the companies that we were working with was doing. It's a company I eventually became the chief medical and science officer of, but it was great. And so like at Medco, it was like logistics. It was like decentralizing, putting diagnostics into homes, a collection, making people not leave their houses, getting people paid, reimbursement. It was like solving the big problems. Like who's going to pay for it? Is it affordable? Is it accurate? Is it accessible? So what we do at Sherlock now, we're always focused on these 3 A's, like accessibility, accuracy, and affordability, and getting them decentralized into people's houses or where they're at. And it started from my Medco days that I really had that idea, like that's what we need to do to diagnostics.
That's amazing.
That's all for this episode of the Biotech Startups podcast. We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Bryan Dechairo. Tune in for part 3 of our conversation to learn more about his journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your friends. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to having you join us again on the Biotech Startups podcast for part 3 of Bryan's journey. The Biotech Startups podcast is produced by Oxagen. Don't want to miss an episode? Search for the Biotech Startups podcast wherever you get your podcasts and click subscribe. Oxagen provides research labs with equipment leases on founder-friendly terms to support paths to exceptional outcomes. To learn more, visit our website www.exedr.com. On behalf of the team here at Oxagen, thanks for listening. The Biotech Startups podcast provides general insights into the life science sector through the experiences of its guests. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from the podcast is at the user's own risk. The views expressed by the participants are their own and are not the views of Exceeda or sponsors. No reference to any product, service, or company in the podcast is an endorsement by Exceeda or its guests.